There are some addresses in America that are just infamous. 112 Ocean Avenue. The name alone, Amityville, probably brings up images of a house with glowing eyes, a family running for their lives. But behind all the Hollywood hype, there's a story that's one part horrifying, undisputed fact, and one part terrifying, hotly debated fiction. So our whole journey here starts with one single massive question.
So what really happened inside that house? Was it actually home to some kind of evil, supernatural force? Or was it the setting for an incredibly elaborate and, let's be honest, an incredibly successful hoax? That's the big question we're going to dig into, separating the very real crime from the chilling story that followed it.
Okay, so our story really unfolds in three main parts. First, you've got the brutal murders back in '74 that kind of set the stage. Then, just over a year later, comes the 28-day haunting that the Lutz family reported. And finally, the book that took this local ghost story and launched it into an international sensation.
Right, so before there were any stories about ghosts or green slime, there was a real-life tragedy. To even begin to understand the haunting, you have to understand the crime. And this part of the story? It isn't up for debate. It's a grim, documented reality.
So, inside the house on Ocean Avenue lived the DeFeo family. But, it was far from a happy home. The father, Ronald Sr., was apparently pretty abusive and had a terrible temper. His son, Ronald Jr., everyone called him Butch, was a really troubled guy with a history of drug and alcohol problems, and he would often lash out at his family. The tension in that house was apparently just thick, long before the night of the murders.
In the early hours of November 13th, 1974, that tension just snapped. Using a high-powered rifle, 23-year-old Butch DeFeo Jr. went from room to room and methodically murdered his entire family while they were asleep. His parents and his 4 younger brothers and sisters. 6 victims.
Now, this is where the facts of the case start to get really weird, and these details have fueled all kinds of theories for decades. Get this. All 6 bodies were found lying face down in their beds. There were 0 signs of a struggle, and the rifle? It was loud, it had no silencer. Yet not a single neighbor reported hearing any gunshots, just the family dog barking its head off. I mean, how is that even possible?
So at first, Butch tried to blame the whole thing on a mafia hitman, but his story just completely fell apart. He eventually confessed, and he said these chilling words. Later on, he changed his story and claimed that voices in the house told him to kill them. But a psychiatrist for the prosecution basically said no way. He diagnosed Butch with antisocial personality disorder, arguing that he knew exactly what he was doing, and Butch was convicted and sentenced to 6 life terms. Okay, let's fast forward. 13 months after the murders, a new family, the Lutzes, they see the house. And they don't see a crime scene, they see their dream home. They knew all about its dark past, but they figured, houses don't have memories. They were about to find out if they were right.
George and Kathy Lutz bought the fully furnished house for a steal, just $80,000. I mean, it was this beautiful colonial with a pool, a boathouse, the whole 9 yards. But that dream soured fast. Just 28 days after moving in, they fled in the middle of the night, leaving almost everything they owned behind, and they never, ever went back.
So what on earth could have driven him out like that? Well, according to the family, it was a whole series of terrifying, escalating events. George's personality totally changed, and he started waking up every single night at 3:15 a.m., which is believed to be the time of the DeFeo murders. Their daughter, Missy, made a new imaginary friend, a pig-like creature she called Jody. They claimed doors were ripped off their hinges, green slime was oozing out of the walls, and they found a secret blood-red room in the basement that wasn't on any of the blueprints. It's just wild.
Now, the Lutz's story of their 28 days in that house could have just faded away, become a local legend. But a chance meeting with an author named Jay Anson was about to turn their personal nightmare into a global phenomenon.
And this shows you exactly how it happened. The Lutzes told their story to Anson, who basically turned their recorded tapes into the book, The Amityville Horror. It came out in 1977 and was an instant bestseller. From there, it just exploded into this huge media franchise with tons of movies and documentaries that really cemented its place in pop culture history.
So why did this story hit such a nerve with people? Well, a lot of people think its success was all about timing. The 1970s in America were a time of major economic anxiety. You had inflation, crazy interest rates, and the book brilliantly wove the Lutz's own financial problems into the supernatural stuff. It mixed a classic haunted house story with real-world problems, which made the horror feel scarily relatable.
And the legend even seemed to bleed right off the page.
Jay Anson himself told these bizarre stories about weird, tragic things happening to people who had early copies of his manuscript. A friend's car supposedly caught fire, another person almost drowned, but the manuscript in the trunk was perfectly fine. It was almost as if the story itself was cursed, which of course just added another layer to the whole mystery.
So, after all the books and the movies and the decades of debate, what is the lasting legacy of Amityville? Well, this is where the story gets really complicated, and honestly where the strongest arguments against the haunting start to pop up. Okay, this to me is the crucial point right here. Since the Lutzes ran out of there in 1976, count them, 4 other families have owned and lived in that house, and they lived there for years at a time, peacefully. So how many of them reported any paranormal activity? 0. Nothing. Not a single haunting, not one strange event. This is probably the single most compelling piece of evidence that suggests the whole haunting was a hoax. Today, the house is just a house. To protect the privacy of the people who live there, the famous 112 Ocean Avenue address was changed. It's just a house on a quiet street in a Long Island suburb. It last sold back in 2017. It's just a piece of property, you know? Stripped of its spooky reputation by the simple act of people living normal lives inside its walls. In the end, the power of the Amityville horror story might not come from a real ghost at all. The murders, they are an absolute, undisputed fact. But the legend, that was born from a perfect storm. A real, gruesome tragedy mixed with the economic fears of a generation, all crafted into a masterpiece of terrifying storytelling. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. Even if there are no ghosts, can the memory of a tragedy, when it's told in just the right way, become a horror story all on its own?